Indian farmers' protests are being called the largest in human history. Since November, farmers in India have been protesting against agriculture laws passed by the government, which has sparked support across the world.
What this basically threatens to do is to completely alter Indian agriculture in a way that will be irreversible.
But why has an issue thousands of miles away caused such an uproar amongst the British Asian community?
For the government to just renege its responsibilities and try to brush this under the carpet, that's just not good enough.
And why does the diaspora feel so connected to this movement?
When you yourself directly are affected, and my father's affected and he's a farmer, then you're only really supporting, why should you kind of have to hold back on your views for supporting your family?
In West London, a family has been sleeping in a tent in their garden since November.
We are protesting in support of the Indian farmers. I come from a family of farmers. I've seen it firsthand how difficult it is for the small landowners to make ends meet. Because we are here, our thoughts always remain with the farmers. We are connected with the cause. So this helps us. Otherwise, it's very easy to forget about the whole thing because it's so far away from us.
21-year-old Talvinder has been helping his uncle Gurpreet to raise awareness and says that people from any background can relate to this issue.
All of us eat food. We all, we come home from work, we have a plate of food and that's produced by the farmer. Many people that weren't initially connected to their roots, whether it be Punjab or any other states, India in general, they have now become connected.
Tent cities have been set up along the borders of Delhi by charity the Hemkunt Foundation to house protesters.
I was there during December and I remember people were sleeping on the roads. You can imagine, when the temperature is about 2 or 3 degrees Celsius, how difficult it can be. I had seen kids without slippers, ladies giving their own clothes to the children so they can actually survive the winters. So then I realized, okay, there is a lot of work to be done.
Farmers have been protesting against 3 bills which aim to reform the industry, which over 50% of the Indian population depend on. But many think small farmers will be vulnerable to exploitation by large corporations.
Most Indian farmers kind of currently sell the majority of their produce at government-controlled wholesale markets. So there is that system of regulation in place where they are able to gain assured basic prices for their output. Now, the farmers' main fear is this is going to change once these laws kind of come into play, where these big corporations can actually dictate what the pricing scheme is going to be, and they are going to be deprived of these basic floor level prices that they have given them some modicum of security.
Over 250 million workers took part in a nationwide strike against the reforms back in November.
Many of us were horrified when we saw scenes and footage of water cannon, tear gas and brute force being used against those peacefully protesting farmers as they marched towards the Indian capital of Delhi.
Slough MP Dhesi wrote a letter to the Prime Minister raising his concerns for the farmers that was signed by over 100 MPs and Lords.
In terms of those that say this is just an internal matter and everybody else should poke their nose out of it, as I said in Parliament, that's not how things work. In the UK, day in, day out, we are debating international issues, human rights issues, as well as just discussing and deliberating upon things which we need to discuss, because that is what actually makes us better parliamentarians. And I think being constructive friends of nations across the world, we owe it to them as well.
He also says he was shocked by the response from Boris Johnson when raising this issue in Parliament.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, and our views that the Right Honourable Gentleman knows, as the Honourable Gentleman knows is of course that we have serious concerns about what is happening between India and Pakistan, but these are preeminently matters for those two governments to settle, and I know that he appreciates that point.
The protests sparked demonstrations to break out in the UK, with a number of organised marches and car rallies.
What stood out was everyone of every age even those of different culture, from Indian descent and stuff, were all there, showing their support, bringing their cars, bringing their family, whether they came by train, wherever it was, but they all came and they all stood together and protested, and many people doing interviews and speeches, and it was just a whole atmosphere which was a sublime. So it was just it was a great day.
Protesters on motorcycles revved their engines outside the Indian High Commission in central London as police lined the road. Many waved flags and raised slogans in support of the farmers.
It sounds really cliche, but it felt like I was coming home. Like, it felt like I've never seen that many Sikhs, so many Punjabis in Central, and seeing that, it literally felt like, oh my God, these are my sisters, my brothers, my family. I remember pausing and looking, and you could just see a lot of genuine pain in people's faces, but also I just saw so much passion. I mean, there was so much seva, which is obviously the good, like helping others going on. People were handing out food, they were handing out water, they were handing out masks.
Opposition parties have called these bills a death warrant for farmers and have accused the government of flouting parliamentary procedure and passing the bills hurriedly. Here at the Indian High Commission, they say that the laws will benefit farmers by creating a competitive market and ensuring freedom of choice. They deny that the minimum support price will be abolished and insist that the government-regulated markets known as mandis will remain in place. A petition to protect press freedoms and human rights in India was started by Maidenhead councillor Singh in December. This received over 116,000 signatures.
I remember there was a prominent moment when I actually went home to see my mum, and she was sitting there watching television, and she was like crying her eyes out, like just watching the news of the report in India, and I was like, oh, what's going on, and she was deeply affected by it.
Understandably, these events have caused alarm.
The petition was debated in Parliament in March. The government response said they look to the Indian government to uphold freedoms, but they have the power to enforce law and order if a protest becomes illegal.
Also making clear that agricultural policy is a domestic matter for the Indian government, as the Honourable Member for Aberafan, the official opposition spokesman, has also confirmed.
Yeah, I mean, the government's response, it was always going to be fairly balanced, but I think the fact that the minister has acknowledged the debate, and there's been a lot of criticism against the Indian government. I think all the MPs, bar one, was actually against the Indian government for the way they've handled this protest. Every corner of the United Kingdom, every constituency MP has a resident who signed the petition, which is, so it's not just, a British Indian thing, it's all across the country.
Tweets by Rihanna and Greta Thunberg brought international attention to the protests in February. In the UK, South Asians are the largest minority ethnic group at over 2.5 million people, but many are unhappy with the level of media coverage the movement has received.
We've actually documented protests happening in Malaysia, Holland, Norway, Belgium, France, Austria. And there are examples of significant coverage of the farmers' protest within British media. However, I guess the thought is, comparatively to the movement, has there been enough coverage? And if I was to speak from what I know, or having engaged with many members of the community, I would say most people think that it's an inadequate level of coverage comparatively to the movement.
Freelance journalist Minreet Kaur says she initially struggled to push this story into the mainstream media.
We shouldn't have to be shouting like we are. I mean, when Black Lives Matter happened, and rightfully so, look at the noise and the movement there. Why is it that it's not the same for someone who's an Indian farmer or an Asian farmer? It should be exactly the same. It's human rights. I think to myself now, I'm a journalist here in the UK, and I'm probably on the radar of them for talking about farmers, but we're quite lucky here that we don't have that, what they have there. But if I was there, I don't know what would happen. I think it's quite, it's not fair for women. I think, they're at risk and their safety is at risk, and it's just wrong. But good on them, because they carried on doing what they were doing. They were not afraid. So, they've inspired me a lot, and probably many other women as well.
Prominent British Asian figures such as Bhangra artist Jazz Dami have also spoken up to raise awareness. He featured in a song to raise money for the farmers.
I kind of wanted to do something that's going to create the awareness in our kind of youth, our people of our generation. Everyone on that song was non-Asian. I was thinking, like, how are they so aware of what's going on, and how are they so in tune with what's going on in India? Because even though the mainstream media isn't talking about it, they know exactly what they're talking about. And I just felt so inspired by that.
Based in Maidenhead, charity Khalsa Aid International have been fundraising to support the farmers' protests and were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in January.
We are talking about, generations old livelihoods when we're looking at the agricultural sector and the farming sector in India. And so you could see why people were so deeply moved and impacted by this, that even during a global pandemic, they had to rise up and protest for this issue, because ultimately affected their livelihoods and the livelihoods of their children's and future generations to come.
Sights of Pakistan and Khalistan flags at UK rallies prompted allegations that the protests are affiliated with separatist movements, calling for an independent Sikh nation known as Khalistan. Some say the protests are designed to destabilise India.
We are very certain about what we are doing. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is the first Prime Minister to initiate reforms which unfortunately have not been initiated in this sector for over 70 years. We do understand that we have separatist elements who have come into the strike, both in India and also abroad, trying to sponsor, trying to finance these artificial manufactured protests, and we will find them, we'll hunt them down and bring them to justice to India.
Acknowledging that there has been a presence of Khalistani support for the protests, many deny that the two movements are linked and say that the protests should solely be focused on the farmers.
There hasn't been a single social movement in India since 2014, since Modi came to power, that has not been painted as an anti-national, connected to Pakistan, funded by terrorists, connected to Maoists, that kind of thing. So right away there is the first kind of instinctive reaction by the Indian government is to think of any protest or any opposition as illegitimate and as basically treasonous.
When you get a group of Sikh, Punjabi people, or even people who support, maybe Sikh rights, Khalistan is inevitably tied. And I think people who say that are possibly just trying to be politically correct. It definitely was there. And it definitely was something that I think fundamentally, when you're talking about farmers and you're talking about the protests, the reason there's so much passion with people is because it ties into, oppression of Sikhs.
Can't deny that there's a presence, and nor would we want to deny there's a presence of Khalistani support and those that would describe themselves as Khalistanis in these movements, in the diaspora at least. Now, whether that translates to what the Indian nationalist biased media would try and make you believe that this is actually a Khalistani movement, and the aim is not to revoke these laws for the farmers, but the aim is to, as they would describe it, break up India. That's completely different, and in fact, that's completely nonsensical from our perspective.
India's Supreme Court have put the laws on hold until further notice, but both sides are refusing to back down.
And let me be very categorical. These laws will not be rolled back, no matter what, because this protest is purely political, driven by a political agenda, by political actors from inside and outside the country, and their goal is to destabilize both political and governance structures of this nation. We'll not allow that to happen.
The protesters aren't going anywhere. They're very resolute. They've been very open about saying they are willing to die before they are willing to re-engage on the situation. They are, because they know that these laws will swallow up their lifestyle. They'll lead them to bankruptcy, and it will reduce them into nothing more than laborers.